It is one thing to write a book that would fall in the category of nonfiction, to write about something you already know about or that you can research. And it's altogether different to write a work of fiction. My guest today is Callista Eckert. Callista is the recent best-selling author of a book called The Halfling. It is a work of fiction, and it would fall in the fantasy genre. And what that means is not only was she creating the characters, but she was also creating the entire world that these characters lived in. It is a fantastic book. And you'll hear in the very beginning of our conversation where we begin to talk about some of the challenges that Callista faced as she was beginning to write this book and what she came up against as a writer of fiction. So without giving too much away, I'm going to invite you to sit back and listen in as Callista Eckert shares her story. This is It Just Takes One. One person, one experience, one moment to change your life. Hello, Callista. Welcome to It Just Takes One.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. As we were getting ready to hit record here, we were talking about some parts of the book, and I'm going to start where we just left off because just before I hit record, we were talking about the book cover.
Yeah.
And so I want to start there because we've done a lot of books. We've done a lot of book covers, and yours was phenomenal. It is phenomenal. When it came through and I saw the finished product, even I took a breath and went, oh,
Yeah.
that's special. So I want to start there because one of the parts of writing a book, one small part that has a lot of power is the book cover.
Mhm.
So let's start with why you chose that book cover and how you felt about it when it finally got to the point where it felt right.
Yeah. Well, I actually have to commend my sister, one of my sisters, Jana. She was at the very start when I first wrote the first draft of this book. She's been like editing, giving me back all of this stuff on the book. So I actually called her when I was getting ready to kind of voice what I wanted the book cover to be. And I was like, I really want the eyes, like Aisling's eyes has to be a part of the book cover because it's so important. And they have to be like what I imagine because I mean, you've read the book. It's so important, her eyes. Like that is like her defining feature almost. So Jaina actually kind of did a very rough sketch of like what I was telling her because I couldn't put it down because I would have just been nitpicking my own art. But she did a really rough sketch, and then I was like, oh, I really like this. So I sent that rudimentary sketch to Nancy. I was like, this is what I want. The dragon, again, dragons are so important in this story, and so important to Aisling that I wanted something in the cover to commend with dragons, and with the eyes, and then the amulet, which throughout the series, because this is will end up being a series, throughout the series, it will become very, very important later on, why the amulet. But the eyes and the dragon what really I wanted. And Nancy, the artist, was amazing with it. So
Yeah, it looks phenomenal. So listeners, if nothing else, go to Amazon and look at that book cover and buy the book because it is so worth it just looking at that book cover and getting the intrigue of what's actually happening on the inside. So let's go to this book and Callista, a little bit more about you as well. The book is a fantasy. Obviously,
Mhm.
we're talking about dragons. We're talking about something called the Halfling. We're talking about amulets and the elven world and all these different fantastical sort of imaginative world qualities. But you, Callista, are currently in med school.
Mhm. Yep.
And I want to talk a little bit about that because I want the listeners to hear a little of your story, to hear how somebody who is in the midst of medical and science and, you know, sort of using that part of your brain has this also very creative, imaginative writing capability. Tell us a little bit more about where this idea came from, how this came out of your experience, and how it melds with your desire right now to go off and be a doctor.
Yeah, so I think one thing when I was growing up is my mom never put me in a box of like, oh, you're really good at this, so we're going to keep you with this. And she was always reading when I was growing up. So she gave me, I think it was Harry Potter that started my reading obsession. I loved it. And she jokes that she can never keep a book in my hand because I read it too fast. So I was always reading. And then I was playing high level soccer. I ended up playing Division 1 soccer. And her and my father supported me through that. And I wanted to be a doctor. And I think it comes down to the fact that I'd never really wanted to be put in a box, and I never was by my parents. So I was allowed to do all these things. So I never really pigeonholed myself essentially into one thing. And I just kind of ran with it. I've been writing stories, poetry a little bit ever since I was younger. And then this story started coming about. I think it was about when I was 16 or 17. I was like, I wonder what would happen if I wrote a book about a half elf, half human girl. Because there wasn't, from my own personal reading experience, there wasn't a lot of books about like a half elf, half human girl who was the focus of the story. And I wanted to write that. And so it kind of took off from there. And I was writing it. I got into college. I decided to do an English major, and take all my pre-med requisites, prerequisites. And I just kind of combined those things. I was allowed to do both. I was able to do both. And I figured the English degree would help me with my writing. And if at the time I didn't know if med school was going to work out because it's so hard to get into, I figured it would be a good thing to have. So that's kind of how I just have all these things that I do. And I have ADHD, so it just helps that I do a little bit of everything.
Keep yourself busy, keep your mind moving. Do
Yeah.
you go back to when you really had that first idea of this story and this character, Aisling? 16 or 17, you said that you
Mhm.
remember that? Do you
Yeah.
remember where that idea started?
I have no idea. I remember, I think I was around that age when I wrote a really short story for my mom for her birthday. And it kind of had a little bit of this storyline in it. And then I think it just kind of grew, and I was always imagining that world. And so finally I pulled up Google Docs and I started writing the book. And then it just went from there. So I don't really remember what sparked it initially. I just remember writing a short story with a little bit of these characters, at least with Aisling, um, and that darkness and the magic, and her being the only in the story. And then it just kind of grew from there.
When you first started writing it, did you have a vision of the whole story? You mentioned Harry Potter, so I'm thinking of J.K. Rowling and how in interviews she had said she had like the 7 book series in her head right from the beginning. She knew where the characters were going and what the story was. Did you have that experience or something completely different?
Oh, something completely different. I knew kind of like the core things I needed to include and I wanted to include, about how Aisling is the key to this whole journey of hers of like figuring out why magic is dying. I knew a little bit about the bad guy, a little bit about him. And I knew I was going to include a male character, main male character of Win, essentially. And but from there, no, I just was writing and I was letting the characters do what they wanted to do. And sometimes they didn't do what I thought they were going to do. So no, I don't know. I don't have the whole story planned out. I'm actually currently editing the second book, and I was like, I didn't know that they were going to do this. So yeah.
That experience that you're describing, we need to just pause on that for a minute because people that are out there listening, most of the people listening to this podcast either have an idea to write a book or just they have dreamed of it, but maybe don't have an idea. But they're all in, different elements of the writing process and what that's like. And what you just described is something that I hear time and time and time again with people who write fiction. And that is that you sort of had these characters come to you,
Mm-hmm.
and then they actually take the story where it's going. So it's not you directing the play, so to speak. You're not directing them. It's the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Describe that experience for you. Like when did you realize that these characters actually had a life of their own and that they were taking the story in a completely different way than you might have imagined?
Halfway through the first book when I was writing it, even because the first draft I had was very, very rough. Like I said, I think I finished it when I was maybe 18. It took me a couple years to finish the story, and then it went through years of editing. But I think halfway through the first book, I was like, where are you going? So I just kept writing. And like I said, I knew there were certain aspects of the story that had to be involved and had to be included. So I made sure I wrote myself a little note at the end of each page, of like, this is where they have to go, so figure it out. But as far as like the relationships, the talking, even like the journey itself, it just kind of went. And I just kind of typed. And I think it helps that, especially if you write fiction or if you read fiction, you imagine the story in your head taking place. It's not like you're just reading words, you're immersed in that world. And so I immersed myself in my own world, and I was watching it happen, and I was just writing what I saw, if that makes sense.
Does make sense. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about the process of writing,
Yeah.
when you're writing fiction especially, but even I think to some extent in nonfiction, because to your point, you're almost kind of putting the movie screen of your mind up, and
Hmm.
even if you're retelling a story, or you're sort of reliving it, kind of seeing it against that screen, and then trying to describe it and take what you're seeing and put it into some kind of words. One of the things, I said this to you earlier today, that I was taken with after reading your book is the writing piece. It's very well written, and that isn't always the case with fantasy books, in my experience, because sometimes they just get a little too disjointed in the imagination, or the person has a great imagination, and they're seeing it, but the way that they've described it, it doesn't flow well. Yours does. Yours has it reads easily. You're following the character. In fact, you get very immersed in the characters and what's happening to them. One of the ways that you did that, you had a couple techniques, and I wanted to talk about them. One is you made a decision at some point to write this in the first person, to make Aisling tell the story.
Mhm.
What made you make that decision, and how did you know that was the direction to start the writing?
It's funny. She actually originally wasn't telling the story. It was in third person originally. I think the short story that like she first kind of grew out of was third person, and then when I first started writing the book, it was third person. And then I went back and I was rereading my own work, and I was like, I don't really like this. I don't feel like it's telling her story well enough. So I switched it to first person. And I think for me, this being my first book, it was easier to tell the story because I almost immersed myself in what Aisling was doing, what she was feeling, how she was developing. So I think that's where it came from, is it was easier for me to tell the story through her by it being in first person. So
Mm. I think it's important to note that, because those of you who are listening that are interested in writing, these are some of the decisions that you're making if you're choosing to write fiction, especially. But again, even nonfiction, are you telling it from your perspective or from outside your perspective? The other decision that you made was about how to interlace dialogue, because these characters clearly are their own personalities.
yeah.
And that is another place where I think writing can fall short, because the characters all start sounding the same, or it's hard to tell them apart because they start sounding the same. And to make dialogue feel like it's natural and
Mhm.
not forced. You did a really good job with that. You made the dialogue flow into the writing. What do you attribute that to? How did you do that?
Uh, Again, it's just seeing. I mean, I probably sound a little crazy just saying like, oh, I'm imagining these people talking and stuff, but it really was. It was just I was seeing it, I was hearing it, and I was typing it. And I also think again it's attributed to the people I had editing the book. Again, my sister Jana, and then one of our mutual friends, Brooke. They both edited the book, and if the dialogue wasn't flowing, they were quick to jump on it and be like, that doesn't sound right, or hey, this isn't based on what I've read prior of this character, this isn't what they would say. So I would go back and I would redo it. And I think that's also a very big piece of writing fiction is let the characters do what they want to do, but also don't be scared to go back and change something in order to make it their personality fit better in who they are and how you're telling them, especially from a first person perspective, because this is all through Aisling. So how they would treat her, I've kind of laid the foundation at the beginning of the book because she is the only half elf, half human species. She's the only one of her kind. So everyone kind of already hates her from the get go. And based on that, I wanted to make that dialogue flow, but also I wanted characters to develop to realize like, okay, she's the only, but she might not be the what we've been taught that she is, especially with the elves. So if that answers that question.
It does. It answers it very well. And you started to right there drop a little bit of another thing that you did very well, which was to keep the intrigue. Again, it's not an easy thing to do to keep suspense, to drop seeds of, sort of plant some things, but you have to wait to find out how they show up. How did you do that in the writing? Because you also did that very well. You kept us turning the page, wanting to find out what's next and how this all fit together. How did you find your way to do that as a writer?
Well, thank you for saying that because it was not easy. But I think it also helps that it was in first person. So Aisling wouldn't know all these things.
Mm.
So it's kind of again seeing it through her eyes and going through like putting on this character hat of Aisling, and she would pick up on stuff because she was trained as an assassin and she was trained to because of all the trauma she's gone through. People with trauma, obviously, they pick up clues more than the normal person would. And I say normal very loosely. But so through her eyes, it's like she's got to put these puzzle pieces together. And I think that's one of the threads I pulled through the entire story of the puzzles pieces keep coming and she's trying to put them together. And as she's doing it, so is the reader. So that's how I try to keep the intrigue going is she doesn't have all the puzzle pieces yet. Um, but yeah, definitely the ending, which you know about the ending. A lot of people texted me after they read that final scene going, what the heck is this? I need this in the book right now. So
Yeah, absolutely right. You left us on a huge cliffhanger and absolutely wanting to know exactly what's coming next. So I'm glad to hear that you're writing a second book. Did you know when you got to that in the writing, did you already know what's coming in the next book? Or did it just hang there and you think, oh, I've got to figure out what's coming next?
um I knew what was coming next in the second book for sure. It took a while. That whole some authors I've heard say like, oh, writing the second book is really hard. It was. The beginning was it was easy to just kind of go into that because I left off a cliffhanger, so I knew exactly where I was going to start. Um, but that storyline continuing through was a little bit more challenging. But the cliffhanger actually made the beginning of the second book easier to write.
At least you knew where to bring the reader next. And I'm just curious about that because you just said that. What was it that was more challenging in the second one that you're working on right now? Where it got challenging, what was it that made it challenging?
I think it was more of giving enough information to keep the readers coming to, because I've actually finished the first draft of the second book. Um, I'm right now in the editing process, but I think it was still giving enough information to keep the readers turning the page like you were describing, but not giving too much. Um, and also just like the characters weren't developing the way I thought they were going to develop. And there were some scenes where I was like, I don't think that this would actually happen. So I think the more I get to know the characters, it's a little bit harder to kind of write them in the way that I did in the first book, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So the more you get to know them, the harder it is to put what they're doing onto the page.
Yeah, because I want to describe all of this. Like, because as I get to know them, I want to describe them. I want to give more of their background, their backstory. I want their relationship with Aisling to kind of come through, but I also need them to do certain things so that Aisling can figure out more of the puzzle pieces and put together what's going on and kind of continue the story. So I think that I have to almost hold myself back from writing as much as I want from them. So that was a little bit more of a challenging portion for.
I get it. I get what you're saying. Yes, because you just want to spill them out on the page, but you can't have Aisling know all of that yet. You have to let her figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fascinating. I love that. I love that. So let's talk more about where this book is going, because here you are in your medical school career, just about done with your schooling. Next year's your residency.
Yep.
You're looking at emergency medicine, you just told me.
Yeah, I am. I just actually submitted my applications for residency yesterday. So interview season comes up soon, and then match is in March, and then I'll figure out where I'm going for residency.
Nice. And just to fill in that little blank, why emergency medicine? Share a little bit about why you chose emergency medicine.
Yeah, so I was telling you, I didn't want emergency medicine when I first started medical school. And the way medical school works is you do 2 years of book work and then 2 years of rotations. So your third year is filled with all the core required rotations that every school has to have their students do. I think there's like 7 of them. And I started my third year of medical school in emergency medicine rotation. It was 4 weeks, and I absolutely loved it. I liked the kind of the variability, the chaos, the you never know what you're walking into, even if you can see the chief complaint of the patient. That might not be the case when you walk into the room. So I liked it and I loved it. And then all of my other rotations, I learned so much from each attending and resident I worked with, and I loved all of it. But I kept coming back to emergency medicine. And that's what I'll be applying to. I've been doing rotations in emergency medicine, and I keep just loving the chaos. Again, ADHD, it fits very well into ER.
It does, but it also makes me think a little bit of Aisling's character as you're describing that a little bit, which is interesting. I hadn't actually put that together until you just said that. Um, Sort of that calm in the chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did my English degree and I got a degree in English creative writing specifically in undergrad. And one of the things I had to do is I had to write a thesis. And I wrote a thesis on how all stories, regardless of what genre they're in, they all come back to the original stories that people were speaking way back before pen and paper existed. Um, the folklore, the like fairy tales, the gods, the goddesses, all stories were come back. There's one thread that you can pull in each story that goes back to an original story. And I think every author writes part of themselves in their characters. And so I didn't do that on purpose, but I see what you mean. And I have been told that Aisling is this calm in the storm. And maybe that was the piece I put into her. Because I do think that every author, regardless if you're writing nonfiction or fiction, you put a part of yourself into your character or even multiple characters. So that's probably what I did.
Yeah, so interesting. I had not even connected it till you just said that. So I think that is true. I mean, I think there is a collective human experience that we have. You know, we all understand certain emotions. We all understand certain um, paths and journeys and things like that because we all have them. So some of that is in there too, just, collective experience. But I do think you're right that it's almost impossible not to put some of yourself into a character.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because you're working the more human portions of yourself that you put into your characters, the more I think readers can understand and relate to your characters. So this was by no means me writing myself as Aisling. I did not do that. She is a, an amazing character, I like to think. But she's got a little bit of other people that I know in her. So I think just writing the human aspect of her was interesting because I could see myself pulling threads from other people and their experiences. And with the other characters or that I wrote, like a Dee or even Win, like pulling those the human aspect of people that I've met in real life into my story. That's what I tried to do.
Was that an intentional piece? I mean, when you were coming up with these characters, were you thinking Win is going to be a little bit like this person, or did you feel that way, or did it just, as the character sort of started developing, did you recognize that you were pulling in pieces of other people?
For some characters, I did it on purpose. I pulled portions of people I knew into their character. For others, specifically Win, no, I just wrote him like I would want to meet someone like Win,
Mhm.
and kind of like that intrigue with him. So I wrote him like I would want to meet a person like him.
Mhm.
But for other characters, like I can't say her name because that would kind of ruin a little bit of it. But there's one character I specifically
Mhm.
pulled someone that I knew and put their kind of essence into that character. So
Mhm.
some yes, some no.
Interesting. So interesting. I just think the creative writing process, because it's so unique to each person,
Mhm.
is so interesting. And, all
Mhm.
the authors that I work with, everyone comes to it with a different process and a different experience of it. And so it's just fascinating to just hear yours. And listeners, if you're listening to this, recognize that whatever your process is will be your own as well. It won't be the same, obviously, as yours, Callista, but there is something really beautiful about the individuality of the writing process.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I read a quote. I think it was Neil Gaiman that said it. He's like, just write stream of consciousness when you first write and then go back and fix it.
Mhm.
So in some aspects, and now it's been edited, of course, but in some aspects, that's what I did. I just wrote just stream and maybe not didn't make sense at the time, but just kind of helped the story along. And then I went back and fixed it.
Mhm.
So that could also be something that people pick up on. Just write.
Yeah, just put your pen on the paper and let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. There is a piece of many of us that that perfectionist tendency where we think. In fact, I just got a draft from somebody this morning, and his comment was, I felt myself already wanting to stop and edit and figure out process and structure and all those things. And he says, I had to literally talk myself out of doing that, because I think we are conditioned in some respects to write a certain way, and our schooling, our academic writing background is much more structured than this type of creative writing. Did you have that pull as you were sort of stream of consciousness into something more tangible? Did you feel that pull in yourself of like, oh, it's almost hard to just let it be kind of this big lump of clay, with no structure to it?
Oh yeah, I think especially as I just kept writing, the more I wanted to control the characters, the more I want to be like, no, this is the way it has to be. This is the way I can't just write. Like it has to make sense at the time. And even in the second book, I think that's what was one of the challenges I faced as well. Is I want it to be perfect, and it might not be, and it's a story, so just tell the story. So
Mm.
yeah, I definitely felt that pull of no, you got to go back and fix it right now. It's like no, just keep going, otherwise you're going to lose your train of thought. So
That's exactly right, and it's hard to get it back. It's
oh
if
yeah.
if it's there and you don't have a chance. I think it was Maya Angelou who said she would be in the field and she would almost hear the poem coming at her like a train. And she
Mhm.
would run as fast as she could to the house to get to her pen and paper, because she knew if she wasn't there when the train came through, it would be gone.
Yeah, my youngest sister Brianna actually has, I don't know if she still has the video saved because the book is done, but she has a video. We were talking through it because she was one of the people that read the book as well. Um, we were talking through, I think towards the end of the book, or maybe this was the second book that I was talking through with her. I was like, oh, I have an idea. And she has a video recording of me talking through the idea I just had, because otherwise I would have forgotten it. And so I went back and like, as soon as I got home, because we were in the car, as soon as I got home, I went and watched that video. I was like, okay, I got to type this scene. Otherwise it's not going to happen or I'm going to forget. So yeah, I definitely feel that.
I think that's another piece of the creative process, because it's almost like there's this idea outside of you that you're downloading, like stuff, you
Yeah.
picked it up, but if you don't, it'll just float by. I think Elizabeth Gilbert talks about that in her book, Big Magic, that the ideas are kind of like in the ether. And if your antennas don't pick them up or you don't do something to grab them, they just float to the next person.
And then it's hard to like get back on the train of writing.
Yeah. 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 So good. So you're going to do your residency as an emergency room doctor. You've written the second book, and that'll be coming out after this one. What do you want to do with these books? Where do you see them going in the world?
I just want them to be as popular as they can be, not for publicity's sake, but for stories being told. I want them to touch as many people as I can. I want people to see themselves in Aisling and, the trauma you've read, obviously, the book, but the trauma that she's gone through. I want people to see something in themselves in her and that they can get through it. And, just this emotional piece, I want that to touch as many people as I can. So I don't really have a specific goal in mind for this book, except as get as popular as it can be so that this story can be told to as many people and that they may be able to find happiness and to find a little bit of escapism, because that's why I like to read so much is, I like going into as many stories as I can. There is a quote that says, I pity the man that has never read because he's only lived one life. That is what I would like to have happen with my book. I like living as many lives as I can in the books that I like reading. So I would like somebody to be able to live and escape into my book and my story and my world and add it to the worlds that they visited.
So beautiful. So beautiful. So when this podcast comes out, the book will already be out. So let's tell people where they can get it, because hopefully by now they are intrigued by this story and are ready to pick it up.
Yeah, it's going to be available on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, and hardback. And I have the cover here. I can show it.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Amazing. It says not for resale because this is like the not the book that they will get, but that is the book.
It's the book. See, it's a really striking cover.
Yeah.
How did it
Yeah.
feel the first time that you held that?
Oh, it felt so weird. I opened it, I think it was late at night because that's when it came in. I opened it, I was like, oh, this is so pretty. It was shiny. I mean, obviously I approved the cover when we were working on it and when Nancy was working on it, but to actually hold it in my hands, I was like, oh, this is so cool. And just to have that and like see those eyes that I've been seeing in my head for years actually be on and like be able to be expressed, and then to see, my face on the back of a book was very surreal for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a special moment. It never gets old, of all the authors I've worked with, that never gets old. I love sharing that moment because it's something it is the process of creation, manifesting this idea into something tangible, and to finally hold it and say, not only can I read it, but now I can share it. It can be on the bookshelves of so many people is very surreal.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what people think. And I've gotten some good feedback on people wanting, like, waiting for it to come out. Like, oh, okay, let me know. Send me the link. So we'll see.
Well, I'll make sure that the link is in the show notes below so they can click on it and get it. Before we finish up today, I always like to ask people about the phrase, it just takes one. The name of the podcast came about because of sort of the intriguing idea of what one thing is, what one book, what one creative idea, what one character, like one thing can do. So for you, just out of curiosity, what does it just takes one mean to you, Callista?
It just takes one chance. So I wrote this book and I originally thought it wouldn't go anywhere. Thought it would just be for, the people I know, but it took one chance to reach out to you guys, to publish with you guys. And even if it's just, one chance, one moment to go, okay, trust in the process, trust in this leap that I'm about to take. I think that's what it means for me. Even sometimes, people feel like they're the only ones in their corner, and that's okay. But it just takes one person to believe it. And even if that person's you, take the leap.
Beautiful. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you on this book. I can't wait to read the second book. I felt the same way as soon as I finished reading this one. The first draft that came through, I was like, oh, she's got more coming.
Yeah.
So I can't wait, and I can't wait to see where the book goes, where it takes you, who finds it, and what impact it has on them as well, because it will.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, congratulations. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.